Hello, here is a narration of a painting that I did of 7 of 9. Started it off using Infinite Painter on my Samsung tablet. So just starting off by blocking things in initially. Getting everything down in a very simplistic form as always. Starting with the darks generally and then working upwards. And this is the output of Infinite Painter, just a simple video file, just to show you what I'm doing, gradually building up the detail and introducing some lights, just overlaying, playing around there, as you can see, by overlaying some former portraits that I've done to add a bit of extra interest. I did a portrait of Daenerys, which always seems to work very well, and that's almost my go-to, just to add in some extra textures and different lighting and just work on. I have a rough idea of what I want to do with this. I want to make the picture of 7 of 9 to be quite painterly, so you can see the strokes, which actually is pretty much my usual technique, but I wanted to go for this a little bit more if possible. Adding in more detail. Now at the moment I'm using Infinite Painter on my Samsung tablet and then moving over to ArtRage on my laptop. This is almost a bit of a sketch level, just getting things roughly in the right places before I start adding the detail. I want to go into ArtRage and get the painterly aspect. Infinite Painter is really good and it's the best one I found on a tablet device, but it doesn't quite give the levels of painterliness or the effects of seeing the brush stroke as ArtRage does, but it does a pretty good job overall. And you can see it's a bit messy at the moment, but that's fine. That's generally the way I like things to go anyway. And I think I'm almost now ready to be in a position to put it into ArtRage, where I can start to trim it and to refine it a bit more. First thing I usually do after I have gone from Infinite Painter is to import it as an image file. It's just a standard image file usually, and then, well, in actual fact I was saying that this one seems to, if you can see there, seems to have imported the PSD, I think. Don't always do that. A lot of the time I just import the whole image and then work on top of it. If I wanted to do my usual and split it into 2 layers, which is the background and the foreground, I would probably just work a selection around the edges and then separate the two in that way. But I have the 2 separate ones, as you can see here, and the layers. First thing I do is to start to add in levels of painterliness. So I am using, as you can see here, the oil brush. I usually have it on quite a high level of stiffness because it seems to give the best response, and a moderate amount of thinners for the moment. What I typically do is when I come to it a bit later on, later stages, I increase the thinner level to get some level of texture on. So as you can see, I'm just refining it through using the oil brush, flipping it quite often to see that it looks alright. And then again, as you can see there, I just overlaid Daenerys again on top, and then I shall be playing around with it, morphing it, warping it to fit over the top, because actually I think that Daenerys has got very similar facial aspects than 7 of 9 has, so I think overlaying my former portrait and refining it a bit might work quite well overall. So as you can see, I'm using the eraser here at no softness, so this will be a very much a hard erase, hard edges, taking bits out which I deem fit and playing around a little bit and see what I have. I'll probably reduce the opacity a little bit as well. As you can see over here, I've got a layer which I'm working on. The opacity is not up too high, as you can see from the circular dial there, and keeping it pretty rough still. Now I'm pretty much happy on the course that I'm going on, and I just merged it down onto the layer and I can continue with what I have. I wasn't really generally happy with the crop, so I extended the canvas, duplicated the bottom bit of the portrait there, flipped it over so it looks roughly in sync, and then after that I can come in and refine it using the clone tool there, which I have. When I first bought ArtRage, I thought, the clone tool, I'm never ever going to use that. Why would I ever want to use that? But actually, in certain times I use it quite often, because sometimes you get the crop wrong, so you need to expand things out, and sometimes you need to duplicate and create an extra piece of the art with the same level of detail in, and cloning works really well for that. So I really thought that I really wanted to see more of her upper body, because the crop would work a bit better and add a bit more interest there. And I'm just introducing the palette knife here to smooth a few things out. And as you can see there, the background, I imported there an image, which is an image of my pan that I cooked some pancakes on, I think. So what you see here is pancake residue, and I just overlaid that one in because I had an idea that that might look quite almost spacey, otherworldly, and refining the background a little bit, seeing whether that works. Then I've also, as you can see here, overlaid an orange over the top of everything, not just the background, to give it a slight tint in the colour. I would have set that to overlay, so it would have saturated things slightly in an orange colour. And that was a picture I took from a rock light that I've got of orange. So again, another one of the textures that I've got taken from my camera. And again, just really more than anything is working on the composition and the colour set to try and get something that I'm happy with. And just playing around with the colours. Now you see here the colours would be more extravagant regarding this. In certain areas I've emphasised the saturation. Now I would have exported this image out into GIMP, which is free and open source image software, very similar to Photoshop, and played around with the colours a little bit, because ArtRage hasn't really got anything like that. It has simple filters with hue, saturation and brightness, but it hasn't really got the really deep stuff. But I've worked out that it's absolutely fine just to export the whole image into GIMP, use it separately, and then import back in again, and then play around with it. So that's what I've done there. Now I'm not quite sure if I'm happy with the background, so as you can see here, I'm using the wet palette knife to move things around and also to blur the edges, because the edges almost seemed, if I just go back a little bit, the edges just seem almost a little bit crisp to a certain extent. And I think I really want to, these edges here are a bit too sharp, and I almost want to give the sense of depth. So I think probably the best thing to do is to use the palette knife and to just smooth down, muddy up the edges, which is something I quite like to do, to add interest and also to bring the viewer's focus into the centerpiece. And as I typically do character portraits, centerpiece typically is the face. This is what I'm attempting to do here, just to go down through. And the beauty is with digital art, of course, is you can play around with all these things, and then you can undo it if it doesn't work. So there's a bit of, so I'm kind of already, looks much more interesting as far as I can say. I think I might have overdone it slightly, but then you can quite easily, as you see here, I have a layer down here, and I often do this when I get to a good point in my painting, and I typically don't work on many layers anyway, maybe one or two. I have a habit of merging everything down and then taking a copy of it. So just right clicking and then taking a duplicate and then dragging it to the bottom of my layer stack and probably making it invisible, although it doesn't really matter because it'd be obscured by the ones on top. And it's almost like a baseline that I've taken for my art. Every now and again, I do always export every now and again as well. Just use export as a JPEG. And tag a letter on the end of it going upwards using the alphabet, so that I can see if I'm not sure because there's always a danger of overworking something. So what I generally do is, because I export at regular intervals, I then have a set of images which I can have a look at through like an image editor and then step through to see whether I'm actually making progress on the image or not. Sometimes I get to a point when I'm stepping through, and then the next step onwards, it almost seems as if I've lost the impact of my overall art. And that's when I know that I may have started to overwork it. That's something I'm always very, very wary of when I'm working on a painting, is I never want to overwork it. I never want to just keep working on it and keep working on it, because I could do this painting here to death. I could go right in and just optimize and smooth out the forehead and the lighting, and then smooth all these things out, and then like on the chin, you know, that's slightly imperfect there, I could sort all that out and then maybe add extra detail to her top and all those kind of things. But I think you just lose the impact of what you're going for. And also the impact, I could come in and then bring all the detail in all the hair and then almost introduce the outline, because if I'm having a look on the reference, it's introducing realism again. But I don't really want that. So anyway, coming back to what I was saying, is that I take a baseline here at the bottom. And what it also helps me to do is that when I'm doing some experimental things with blending, what I sometimes like to do is, because I have a baseline, which is a snapshot taken before I've done the blending, is that my blend layer, I tend to change the opacity slightly on it. So therefore the effect of the blend is being taken away, so it's a bit more subtle. Layers are incredibly powerful, probably one of the most powerful things in a digital art application, and they're overlooked a lot of the time in what you can do with them. Let's carry on, let's see what's going on here. And now I'll be actually really refining things and making things pop a little bit better, enhancing the contrast around her face, for example, those kind of things. And again, you can see there I'm turning on and off, going backwards and forwards between those two layers. A little bit there you could see using the warp tool slightly, which is around this time of a painting I tend to use it, because when I flip sometimes I spot something that doesn't quite look right. So switching to the warp, which is a liquefy effectively, is a very useful thing just to correct any issues. Then just flipping quite a lot and making sure that it looks okay. And I get the feeling now I am actually pretty close to finishing this, because I've got the overall. The only thing is, as you can see here, there was a little nagging thing in the back of my mind. And earlier on I extended the canvas downwards, which is fine, but also the crop didn't really sit very well with me. I always thought it probably would look better with a more narrow crop to bring more focus to the face and to chop off these edges. It almost felt like a bit of dead space on the edges there. So that's what I do. That's one of the last things that I apply to my portrait. And here I just felt as if I lost some of the painterly strokes as I was going along and playing around with things. So I've now created a layer here, which would be a multiply layer. And as you can see here, I have set the oil brush to no stiffness at all, so the paint will splash on quite liberally, and then taking the thinners all the way down and set it to white. So what this will do is this will give you very thick paint, but because you have it set to multiply, you won't see the white colour. All you'll see is the effect of the paint and the paint strokes on top. It gives almost an effect of the painterly aspect that you've painted all of these strokes on, which is something that I often do at the end of a painting to just give it that more painterly. I know I've said painterly many times, but more of that traditional look. And here is probably, I'll just go back a little bit. Here was a tiny thing that I did. I had a feeling that I just wanted to vignette it slightly. And just to, again, even all these little tricks that I've been doing, according to blending around the outside of the face, to cropping things in a little bit, keeping the detail at a less high fidelity around the edges, the colour drawing you in as well, and the eyes, all those kind of things with the vignetting as well is all the things to draw you right into the face. And all I've done with this one is I've set a new layer to multiply, used the gradient bucket fill to a radial, which is that one there. Oh, it says the radial there. And then just done white to black, as simple as that, and then overlaid it, and then I just changing the opacity to get the right kind of look. And that's it. That's what I finished off with. As you can see there, I've got everything drawing into the face, everything looking quite painterly. I've said it again, traditional looking, let's say. And again, as I've said, I could carry on and I could render and render and render. You know, I could put in some hair strands here, carry on here, but I don't really want that. I want it to look more rough. I want it to, because I think it generally has more impact if you do it that way. Okay, there we go. I shall see you next time when I narrate over my next video. Thank you for listening.